should you be in view of the end of the age and the accompanying events? Now, if you're still wondering, Peter didn't leave us much time in his letter to think about an answer to the question, because he followed it up with the answer. He wrote this: "You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming." Now, part of his answer to this question seems obvious, right? We ought to live holy and godly lives since the age is going to come to an end and the accompanying judgment will take place. I mean, who in their right mind would think, in view of those realities, that we should live as lawless and criminal as possible? But what he means by holy and godly, we're going to look at more closely next week in our Flock Talks. But what about these circumstances or perspective that he calls us to while pursuing this kind of life? In other words, what does he mean specifically by the phrase, "as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming"? Well, first of all, let's consider the first part of that phrase. What does it mean to look forward to the day of God? Or maybe we could ask, do we look forward to the day of God? Quite possibly, that seems like a strange question to some of us. And if it does, it's almost certainly a result of looking at the prospect solely within the framework of judgment and retribution. Obviously, there would be good reason for that perspective, because Peter wrote in this letter these words: "That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat." But is that the only perspective? Paul would argue resoundingly no to his friend Peter. A few years earlier, Paul wrote to some of the same people that Peter addressed in his letter these words: "Set your minds on the things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." Now, looking at the end of the age from this perspective creates a sense of hope, not horror. So it's possible that we could look forward to the day of God by simply changing the kinds of things we set our minds on. But what about speeding its coming? As you can imagine, there are some opinions on this topic, but many in the Jewish community as well as in the Christian community think that this has to do with repentance in the lives of God's people. Peter himself preached in Acts chapter 3 that the repentance of Israel was associated with the sending of the Christ and the restoration of all things. However, the repentance of Israel, and for that matter, our repentance as followers of Jesus, has to do with the ultimate accomplishment of the mission of God. The ingathering of the full number of Gentiles, Paul said in Romans 11. We'll consider this more deeply next week, but let's say that Peter implies that God allows for our activity in determining when he will bring his promise to renew all things to completion. Wow. That's a lot to consider, right? But it's also reason to take more seriously our responsibility to be a certain kind of people in view of Jesus' promise to return and restore all things. Now, how about you? Are you looking forward to the day of God? Are you speeding its coming? If not, maybe it's time for a change in perspective. Why don't we give that some thought this weekend? I'll hope to see you Sunday, and then we'll talk again next week. God bless you. I love you all.